It's kind of amusing to reflect on how much society has changed since our childhood. For some, it's a bit sad, but change is just bound to happen. The stuff we used to think was a blast might seem a little scary or risky these days. So let's take a stroll down memory lane and chat about things that were totally fine back then, but nowadays, you wouldn't even think about doing. Back in the good old days, knocking on someone's door or ringing the doorbell was a friendly thing to do. It was like neighborly vibes all around. You could just show up, and even if it was a surprise, the door would swing open with a warm welcome. You might ask to borrow a cup of sugar or check if your buddy could come out to play. But now, oh boy, the scenario has flipped. If you hear an unexpected knock, some folks play the "pretend I'm not home" game, secretly wishing the visitor just vanishes. Others, when they dare to answer, act like the unexpected guest is some kind of intruder. It's like a whole new world out there, at least in some neighborhoods. Doors that once happily opened for chats and favors now have people on high alert, unsure of what surprises might be on the other side. Times have changed, haven't they? Back in the days before video games and smartphones took over our lives, it wasn't just normal for kids to play outside. It was practically a must-do. No hovering parents around, just us and our imagination figuring out ways to have a blast. Whether it was creating mud pies when it rained or constructing forts with pals deep in the woods, we were left to our own devices. The cool part, it didn't matter what we did. The key was keeping busy and being active. Fast forward to now, and it's a whole different story. Parents are super cautious about safety, and it feels like the world has become this place filled with constant dangers. The freedom we once had to roam around and play without adults keeping a watchful eye has kind of faded away. Kids these days might not get that taste of unsupervised adventures like we did back then. Times sure have changed, and it's a bit of a bummer. Way back, about several decades ago, there was this shocking acceptance of sexism at work, with a whopping 65% off the radar. Sadly, male chauvinistic behavior was kind of the norm for many women, especially in the workplace. Not everyone was like that, of course, but inappropriate behavior happened quite regularly. Nowadays, things have tightened up on what you can say to anyone, especially in the workplace. Social norms have become way more strict. If someone crosses the line, there's this whole deal with lawsuits and the ever-present cancel culture. It's become the way many of these issues are handled. It's a far cry from the good old days when such behaviors were swept under the rug. The world has evolved, and thankfully, there's less tolerance for that kind of nonsense. Let's take a little trip down memory lane to a time when not wearing a seatbelt was actually an option. Back in the 1980s, many places didn't require folks to buckle up. It's kind of surprising to think about, considering how crucial seatbelts are in saving lives during accidents. The change didn't just happen on its own. It took a mix of new laws, awareness campaigns splashed across TV and billboards, and a crucial helping hand from the police making sure people followed the rules. Fast forward to today, and strapping on seatbelts has become second nature for most of us. It's funny how something that was once optional is now so ingrained in our habits. Think about the good old days at the airport. It was a whole different scene compared to now. Saying your goodbyes wasn't just a quick wave at the curb. No, you actually walked your loved ones to the gate, waiting with them until they boarded the plane. And picking someone up? You could stroll right to the gate to welcome them as they stepped off the plane. But then security concerns took a front seat, and now only certain folks can go beyond those security checkpoints. So, no more leisurely walks to the gate for heartfelt farewells or joyful reunions. These days, it's all about brief goodbyes at the car, and maybe a text message letting you know they've safely boarded and landed. The airport experience has transformed, and the nostalgia of those gate moments is just that, a memory from the past. Once upon a time, spanking was the go-to method for taming an unruly child. Whether it was a belt at home or the infamous school paddle, it was a widely accepted form of discipline. Fast forward to today, and those practices are like ancient history. The divide on spanking is pretty stark. Some argue it doesn't work and is downright abusive, while others think the absence of spanking is the root of today's societal issues. In our present world, though, spanking is a big no-no. It's considered taboo, and there's a strong shift towards more positive parenting techniques. The spotlight is now on fostering communication. Back in the day, smoking wasn't just socially acceptable, it was practically a universal pastime. Whether it was Phil with his filtered cigarettes or someone else enjoying the unfiltered ones, pipes or cigars, everybody had their preferred smoke. You could light up pretty much anywhere, from airplanes to restaurants and even in your car with the windows rolled up. It was a different world. But then, as the health risks linked to smoking became more evident, things began to change. Regulations popped up to put the brakes on smoking in public places. To make matters even more challenging for smokers, hefty taxes were slapped onto cigarette packs, making them less accessible. Fast forward to today, and smoking has become a rare sight. Finding a spot where indoor smoking is allowed is like trying to locate a needle in a haystack. Times have shifted, and what was once a common scene has dwindled into a far less prevalent habit. Back in the day, catching chicken pox was like a rite of passage in growing up. Up until the mid-1990s, it seemed almost everyone would eventually get it, and then it was just a matter of getting over it. Some folks, eager to speed up the inevitable, even organized chickenpox parties. It was a way to expose their kids to the virus and just get it done with. Some folks, eager to speed up the inevitable, even organized chickenpox parties. It was a way to expose their kids to the virus and just get it done with. Fast forward to today, and things have taken quite a turn. Vaccines have swooped in, preventing kids from catching chickenpox altogether. You won't find anyone excitedly posting about an upcoming chickenpox party on Facebook these days. The landscape of childhood illnesses has shifted, and the days of embracing chickenpox as a natural part of growing up are slowly fading into the past. Nowadays, everyone makes sure to grab some sunscreen when planning to soak up the sun for a while. But let's step back to a time when people would just lounge in the hot sun with no UV protection. Sunburns were almost like a shared experience, and dealing with peeling skin was just part of the post-sun fun. They even had suntan oils that promised a darker tan, so there wasn't much concern about too much sun exposure. Fast forward to today, and sunscreen has become a big deal, not to mention quite pricey. This is especially true after some sunscreens were taken off shelves due to containing benzene, a chemical linked to cancer. The sunscreen game has evolved, and now it's not just about protecting your skin, but also navigating the world of safe and effective products. Things sure have changed from the carefree sun-soaking days of the past. Back in the 1960s and 1970s, if you needed to go from point A to point B without your own car, all you had to do was stick out your thumb along the side of the road. Hitchhiking was the norm, a perfectly acceptable way to catch a ride. However, as safety concerns grew and new laws labeled it as a crime, hitchhiking became largely obsolete. In today's world, the scene has shifted. Enter paid hitchhiking in the form of Uber and Lyft. No more thumbing for a ride. You just whip out your phone and voila. A random person, your driver, pulls up to offer you a ride. It's a whole new era of getting from one place to another, replacing the days of relying on the kindness of strangers by a more structured and paid ride-sharing system. The times have indeed changed on the road. Let's take a trip down memory lane to the days of going to the circus, where live animals were the stars of the show. Elephants, lions, tigers, and a whole bunch of exotic animals thrilled thousands of spectators. Throw in some death-defying acrobatics and other curious acts, and you had the quintessential circus experience. But truth be told, it was the animals that truly made the circus feel like the circus. However, as the years passed, concerns grew about the mistreatment and sad living conditions of these animals. Public focus shifted to the welfare of these creatures and the need for more ethical treatment. This shift in perspective meant that many circuses had to change their business model, one that no longer included animals in captivity. The iconic circus, as we knew it, underwent a transformation, acknowledging the importance of treating animals ethically and letting them live in more humane conditions. The circus became a different spectacle, one that reflected changing values and a greater awareness of the well-being of the animals involved. Over the years, many colleges and professional sports teams have found themselves rethinking their names and mascots to be more culturally sensitive. In the past, it was pretty common for teams to adopt nicknames like Savages, Chiefs, or Redmen, often using Native American references to represent their brand. Back then, it was considered completely acceptable. As time rolled on, however, these racially insensitive mascots began to fall out of favor. Teams like the Washington Redskins and the Cleveland Indians serve as prime examples of this shift. Quietly, many others have also followed suit, opting to change their names to be more inclusive and less offensive. The evolution reflects a growing awareness and commitment to cultural sensitivity in the world of sports, acknowledging the need for respectful representation and leaving behind the outdated stereotypes of the past. When couples tie the knot, it's a pretty familiar sight for the woman to take her husband's last name. This tradition has been around for as long as we can remember, going strong for a few hundred years. But in today's world, with the rise of feminism, things are changing. More and more couples are deciding to break away from this tradition. These days, it's not uncommon to see women choosing to keep their maiden name. Some couples even flip the script, with the man taking the woman's last name, trying to shake off this old-fashioned tradition. The landscape of name changing in marriage is evolving, reflecting the shifts in societal views and the pursuit of equality between partners. Back in 1969, women were just starting to break through the glass ceiling in higher education. Princeton and Yale opened their doors to female students for the first time, but it took several more years for some other Ivy League schools to catch up. In that cultural setting, only about half of Americans in 1969 said they'd support their party's nominee for president if that nominee happened to be a generally well-qualified person who was a woman. This itself was an improvement from 33% in 1937. Fast forward to today, and the scenario has drastically changed. Almost everyone, about 94% of Americans, now express their willingness to support a woman for the position of president. The landscape of acceptance and support for women in leadership roles has transformed over the years, reflecting a significant shift in societal attitudes. Back in the 1960s, several political movements, including the push for reproductive rights and women's equality, along with concerns about global population growth, might have played a role in changing Americans' views on large families. In 1967, a whopping 7 out of 10 Americans believed that having 3 or more children in a family was the ideal. However, by 1971, that preference had dipped to 52%, and by 1977, it further decreased to 36%. After hitting a low point at 28% in later years, Americans' preference for larger families has seen a slight increase, reaching 41%. Despite this uptick, it hasn't quite reached the level it was before the era of Woodstock. The cultural and political shifts during that time left a lasting impact on how Americans perceive the ideal family size. Flashback to 1974, just 5 years after the iconic Woodstock, where a significant majority of US women, about 60%, shared in a Roper organization poll that if given the choice, they would rather stay at home and take care of the house and family than have a job outside the home. As the late 70s rolled in, Roper's subsequent updates revealed a more balanced split among women on this question. Jumping ahead to 3 years ago, a Gallup poll showed a subtle shift. This time around, a slight majority of women expressed a preference for working outside the home. The evolving attitudes captured in these surveys offer a glimpse into the changing dynamics and aspirations of women over the years, reflecting the broader societal shifts in gender roles and work preferences. From the 1950s to the mid-1960s, Americans held on to their strong connection to religion, with a high percentage stating that it was very important to them. However, as the Woodstock era unfolded, there was a noticeable decline in religiosity. Although Gallup didn't measure religiosity in 1969, their data from 1965 to 1978, bracketing the Woodstock years, tells a compelling story. During this period, there was a significant drop in the percentage of Americans who considered religion very important to them, falling from 70% to 52%. While reported church membership and attendance declined more gradually between the 1960s and 1970s, recent times have seen a significant and rapid drop in both figures over the past 15 years. The changes in Americans' connection to religion, as reflected in these trends, underscore the shifting landscape of religious attitudes and practices in the United States. Back in the day, it was pretty much a hard and fast rule. A lady never stood up during an introduction. Unless there were a few exceptional circumstances, sitting was the norm. But fast forward to today, especially in a business setup, things have shifted. Now, when a woman is meeting someone or saying hello, the golden rule is to always rise, literally stand up. It's become a norm to show that extra bit of courtesy and respect in these professional situations. In the realm of business, a good old handshake is the way to go. It's the go-to greeting, establishing a professional connection. In social situations, the choice between a handshake or a hug often depends on how well you know the person. Now here's a fun fact about hand kissing. It's more of a continental tradition than an American one. Back in the day, it was considered proper to kiss the hand of married ladies. Single women, on the other hand, were given a respectful bow. Fast forward to today, and hand kissing is a bit too fancy for our everyday interactions. So gentlemen, if you find yourself in a place like Rome, go ahead and give it a shot. But if you're in Chicago, Boise, or anywhere else in the USA, stick to the good old handshake. It's the universally accepted way to greet someone. In the past, there was a bit of a protocol when it came to getting into the back seat of a car. The gentleman would open the door for the lady, step in first, and then let her follow, closing the door behind her. Why this order? Well, it was often because the lady was wearing a dress, and sliding gracefully to the other side of the back seat in a dress could be a bit tricky. However, times have changed, and our approach has become more practical. Nowadays, with drivers on the road being less patient, the person who can swiftly navigate to the seat behind the driver takes the lead. They hop in, scoot over, and make way for the other person to enter and close the door promptly. This way, the car spends the least amount of time stopped, avoiding unnecessary delays and keeping the traffic flowing smoothly. It's a shift towards a more common-sense approach in our fast-paced world. In the United States, calling someone by their first name is usually considered totally fine, especially in professional settings. However, it's good to know that in some European countries, people stick to a more formal approach and may not use first names with co-workers, clients, or vendors. So, if you're unsure, it's always a safe bet to lean towards formality. It's never considered wrong to address someone as Mr. or Miss followed by their last name. In the US, we often switch to first names pretty quickly after meeting, but when in doubt, a touch of formality is never a misstep. People decide not to drink alcohol for various reasons, and their choice is often a personal matter. Nowadays, offering someone an alcoholic beverage when they're already sipping on something else is considered impolite rather than courteous. The good news is, you can still join in a toast regardless of what's in your glass, even if it's just water. So, cheers to being able to raise your glass, whatever the beverage, and celebrate without any pressure to partake in alcoholic drinks if you choose not to. It's all about respect for individual choices and enjoying the moment together. Not too far back in time, there was this unwritten rule. You never handed back an empty food container to the person who brought you food. It was a thoughtful gesture, but let's face it, it kind of didn't make much sense. The idea that you had to return the dish full meant you had to go the extra mile for the gift. Nowadays, things have taken a turn for the better. Instead of returning an empty container, it's considered kind to put the food in a container that the person can keep as part of the gift. Even if it's a recyclable plastic container, it's a way of showing that you don't expect the person to go through the trouble of returning it. It's all about making the experience of receiving and giving food a bit more convenient and enjoyable for everyone involved. Thanks for watching the video, and if you found it informative, please like and subscribe to Time Capsule for similar content. We look forward to sharing more knowledge with you in the future. Until then, take care.